But obviously, I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about UX designer opportunities, but I'm also going to talk about and share how we can apply UX design to STEM in general, kind of like how Ramneet was implying as well. So that was awesome to hear. So maybe what I'll do first is give you an idea of what we're going to talk about. Like I mentioned, I'm going to briefly go over my background, not going to spend much time on that. Just a few points I want to highlight for you. Then I'm going to give you kind of like a shared definition of how we might look at UX design. And then I'm going to share with you some of the typical things and activities that a UX designer would do. And then we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive and look at user experience related to STEM specifically. Going to talk about some ideas and approaches of how to become a UX designer if that's of interest to you down the road, and also how to apply UX design to STEM itself. And then we'll have a QA session from what I understand. And I also have some resources to share with you if you want to learn more after this session. So like I mentioned, pretty brief here, my background, I'm actually a graduate with an economics degree, computer science minor, and I got into the field in the early 90s, basically through self-learning. So a couple things I just want to highlight when you're looking at my background information. Couple of key things that I found very successful in my career, some of the reasons why I was successful in my career, is I actually applied a lot of the ideas of user experience design to my career, to the clients I worked with, trying to think about their needs, how to meet their goals, how to design for their experience, as well as, of course, the products I was helping to work on. So that's one thing I want to highlight. And another thing I want to highlight is if you're interested in user experience design as a career, I found it very helpful to talk in the language of business to my clients, not in the language of user experience design per se. So of course, I talk with the team in terms of user experience design terminology and things like that, processes, techniques, and all those things. But when you're working with clients and you're working with companies, you really got to speak the company language with regards to what you do and kind of position the benefits of user experience design in those means. And so that I found very helpful. Yeah, so I think that's all I probably want to say about my background. You can read that slide more if you want to. We'll make sure the slides are available for everybody. And of course, we're recording this. So just the idea of trying to define user experience design it's pretty broad. It's a very broad field. So I was wondering, well, how would I best kind of share that with you today? This is one of my favorite examples. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is called piano stairs, okay? This was done in Sweden by a company working with Volkswagen. And the goal here was to help people get more exercise, to be healthier in their lifestyle. So instead of taking the easy way out, which would be the escalator, being lazy, convenient though, this company designed a user experience to encourage people to take the stairs. Literally, they made the stairs not only look like piano keys, but sound like piano keys. And so as you walked up the stairs, you actually played the piano. And this is an excellent example, I think, of user experience design. To get out of the box of thinking, oh, we're just talking about screens and we're talking about software. Not at all. User experience design can be very vast in what it can do for people, and it can change behavior in a positive way. So later on after the session, if you're curious to learn more about this project, just Google piano stairs, and you'll find all kinds of articles and a video actually about that, which you can look at. So this is, to me, one of my favorite examples of how beneficial user experience design can be for people. In terms of a written definition, I really like the ISO International Standards Organization definition of user experience design. A person's perceptions and responses that result from the use or anticipated use of a product, interactive system, or service. And again, I think this dovetails really nicely with that real world example I showed you of the piano stairs, and it works equally as well when we talk about websites, software design, service design, all kinds of things. So that is also my favorite written definition of what user experience design is. This is a diagram originally created, I believe, by Dan Saffer. This will give you an idea of all the kinds of domains related to user experience design. It's a very all-encompassing kind of field, if you will. And there's many opportunities for lots of us to contribute to the field in many different ways. And so this is, again, one of my favorite visuals to kind of show how different aspects of many different fields are related to user experience design and what kind of needs to be considered when you look at user experience design in totality. So piano stairs, great example of user experience design at work in the world. ISO definition, one brief sentence definition of user experience design, and this diagram by Dan Saffer to illustrate all the different kind of domains and aspects related to user experience design. Scott Birkin, he's a writer who's been writing about collaborative work for many years. He's a well-known speaker. He's written recently a new book that introduces kind of design to a wider audience, how design makes the world. He included what he called a design checklist in his book, and I've kind of taken that and I'm calling it an experience design checklist, because I love this as a little brief checklist for us to do a self-check in terms of what are we doing and trying to do with design. Thinking about A, what are we trying to improve, right? B, thinking about who are we trying to improve it for? C, trying to make sure we have a plan to know if we are successful or not. And I think these days, the last point is especially important. Who might be hurt by your work now or now in the future, thinking about design ethics. And that's something that was lacking, I think, in many ways earlier on, but I'm so happy to see that being more of a forefront of an issue these days, to think about not only the positive aspects of our work, but perhaps if there's any negative aspects and how perhaps we can approach that. So that was a brief look at user experience design. Again, there's so many different ways to define user experience design. Those are just a couple of my favorite ways. Again, if you Googled user experience design after the session, you'll come up with lots of different perspectives, I'm sure. As I mentioned, we're going to have a dedicated Q&A session once we go through the slides. So I'm looking forward to taking your questions. Feel free to put them in the chat or anything else to note them as we go through. So the next topic I'd like to touch upon is, what does a user experience designer do? And these are some activities that are very common for a user experience designer. I'm trying to actually group them for you. Discovery oriented means learning about who we're designing for. Design oriented is about actually creating some possible designs for that audience. And then shared activities are things that are almost global in nature, regardless of your activity or specialty perhaps in user experience design. So in relation to discovery-oriented stuff, we do things like user needs analysis. We learn about our target audience. We analyze that information and synthesize some key knowledge and calls to action, if you will, with that. And sometimes we frame our problem. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Design-oriented activities might involve sketching and prototyping. Interaction design, again, I'll talk a bit about that later as well. And some shared activities. Collaboration is a key element of user experience design. It's not, design is more effective when it's broken away from silos. And so you want to get the insights and perspectives of a variety of people. And so collaboration is important. Facilitation of that kind of process is also key. And presenting and sharing information is also part of it. So sometimes these are called soft skills, but I really consider them essential skills for an effective user interface designer. So these are just some example activities that are very common for user experience designers. I just kind of went online, did a quick little search. Of course, Amazon job descriptions came up as one of my first search results. Thought I'd share that with you just to kind of get a sense of, I won't go through this in detail, but you can look at this description and you can see that it definitely hits upon multiple items that I was highlighting in that earlier slide about some very common user experience design activities. I should mention, by the way, user experience designer is a very broad term as well, and you're going to find that it can represent a wide variety of things. sometimes more design oriented, sometimes more research oriented, sometimes more real world oriented, sometimes more software oriented. So it's quite broad, but I thought at least this example job description that you can look at later, and of course the URL is there for you as well. Hopefully the job is still up. Plus, by the way, the job I picked there is more of an intro level. Now, interestingly, Amazon doesn't actually have like a junior designer kind of entry level. I think they call it UX designer level 1 or level 2. So I did try to pick a more introductory kind of job description for you to take a look at. Here are some attributes that I think are really valuable that I have found in many great UX designers that I've worked with. You know, being communicative, lifelong learning is critical in this field, super critical, and I'm sure in STEM equally so. Being curious and being humble, being able to tell stories in terms of helping people envision product usage, the audience that the product is intended for, etc. Facilitation, I've mentioned before, collaboration as well, and empathetic, you know, being able to really try to learn what things are like for other people other than yourself, and trying to take that information into account when we work on our designs. So far we've taken a look at what user experience design is, and I tried to give you a little bit of idea of what user experience designer does. The main part of the session will now be looking at user experience and, of course, STEM, because that's why you're here today, right? So as I mentioned, I actually have two different goals here in this last section of my little talk. One, I'm going to give you some more information if you're interested in becoming a UX designer in the future. But I'm also going to spend a little bit of time as just to give you some examples of how you could apply UX design today, perhaps, to STEM, both perhaps in your STEM college or university work, or perhaps in your co-ops, or perhaps even after graduation out in the industry. And I call that moving sideways. Why am I calling that moving sideways? Moving sideways means that, you know, if you want to become involved in UX design, a very effective strategy is to leverage your current knowledge and complement that with some UX design techniques, approaches, and tools. And if you do that successfully and you find you're good at that, you're actually on your way to perhaps being more of a specialist in UX design. So that's the idea of moving sideways. Here are some example specialties that we often find with user experience designers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very broad field, and there's many different things you can do. So let me just walk you through a little bit here what we have. What's information architecture? Maybe you're wondering about that. That's being able to organize information in a meaningful way for your audience, to help them navigate that information and to locate the information that they need. That's information architecture. Interaction design is actually my specialty. That's really very equivalent to the idea of user interface design, when you're trying to decide upon how the audience will interact with a product or service in order to reach their goals. And most of my work is on either mobile devices, web apps, or desktop apps. User interface copywriting, one of the main means of communication still in a user interface is the written text. So copywriting skills are important. Accessibility, more important than ever. We want to make sure, because now technology impacts all of society, we need all of society to be able to interact with technology. So accessibility is very important. Designing visual interface designs that are pleasing and effective, that's important. Service design is sometimes found in government operations, sometimes found in private operations, where you're going to actually design the experience of using some kind of a service that's provided. User research is learning about your intended target audience. Product design is actually helping define what a product would be to be successful for a particular audience. And defining strategy, knowing where you are in your product cycle, and then where you want to be, and then how to help yourself get there with product improvements and service improvements. So those, again, pretty brief. You could Google each and every one of those terms. I'm trying to use terms that are pretty standard in the field, so that way you can Google them later and learn more about them if you're interested in any of them in particular. What about pathways of knowledge to become a UX designer? Well, of course, formal degree. And this is something so amazing to see now, because when I started, there wasn't very much of that, only in terms of human factors, maybe in cognitive psychology. But now there's many formal degree opportunities. They might be called human-computer interaction. It might be called user experience design. Lots of different terms out there, but definitely a lot of formal degree opportunities. There's also a wide variety of online courses that you can take on the subject. Conferences and workshops, they're an excellent way, either in person or remote, to learn more about particular topics in user experience design. Practice, I mean, that's the number one way you become a better designer, is you actually design. And so you need to be constantly trying to improve your craft as a designer, if design is your specialty anyway, like myself. So practice is really important. Of course, lots of great articles out there and books. By the way, I do teach a computing science course on user interface design, and all my course materials are public, and I'll be sharing that with you at the end of these slides, so you can actually start learning more about UX design right away if you want to, from my course site. However, with user experience design, there's also another pathway, and that's really through experience. In other words, it's great to learn and read about user experience design, but also it's important to be doing user experience design. And one of the best ways to do that is to build a portfolio. Portfolio is essential in the industry. It's a way that many jobs are really or job applicants, pardon me, are really assessed for their capability and work history. And so if you're in industry now, you've got a portfolio that's great, but if you're not, you can always just start somewhere. I mean, even your own website, or perhaps a personal side project, or volunteering for a community group and helping build a website there. There are many different ways to start building a portfolio. And by the way, a tip for you is that if you are building a portfolio and you're going to use it to help maybe get a co-op position or some kind of a full-time position later on, you should view your portfolio as an opportunity for storytelling, to tell stories about the challenges that were on this project, how you overcame those challenges, what you learned with your audience through perhaps user research, or perhaps testing your designs, surprises along the way, etc. So that's a really effective way to position a portfolio when you're applying for a job, when you're meeting with somebody, is to use it as an opportunity to tell stories. That's something that I found very effective. Of course, utilizing UX design techniques, I'm going to talk about that pretty soon actually, in whatever current position that you have, because then you actually start building elements that could be in a portfolio. And by the way, a portfolio doesn't mean just finished screens. A portfolio can document user research. A portfolio can document audience analysis and usability testing. A portfolio can document sketch and ideation. It can document lots of things, not just finished screen images, okay? And lastly, of course, through university like SFU, great co-op opportunities. This is also a way to kind of get into experience of user experience design. Another pathway to become a user experience design, I think, is by connections, right? So one of my favorite techniques when I was just early on in the field is what I call an informational interview. It's not when you reach out to talk to somebody about getting a job. It's when you reach out to someone and you want to learn more about something in particular. And in this case, of course, user experience design. So it could be about, how a particular company is doing user experience design. It could be learning more about what kind of people they're looking for to do that. It could be about what their team does. It could even be talking about, in general, some, what are the most common or important techniques or tools that are being used, etc. So I've done many informational interviews on both sides of the table, and it's a great way to learn more and make some connections over a coffee. If you're joining us from Vancouver, there's several local UX related events. Van UX has been a long-term group in town that often meets up to kind of have a different collection of speakers about user experience design. And by the way, this year online, the Vancouver UX Awards are coming up. So check that out and see what's coming up with that. Social media, of course, Twitter and LinkedIn, and of course the web, you can start to actually write. You know, if you're learning about user experience design, blogging is a great way to make that learning visible, and that can lead to some connections as well. So that's another possibility. And so those are some highlights about becoming a UX designer. And then the last little part I want to wrap up here is the idea of, you know what, you don't, if you're interested in UX design, and maybe at some point down the road, you're interested in becoming a UX designer, but you could start to apply UX design perhaps today, even to your schoolwork in STEM, or perhaps co-op opportunities, or if you're graduating soon. There's a lot of opportunities in STEM to apply UX design in general. What I've tried to do here is I've tried to highlight 3 kind of different ways you could apply UX design: as a philosophy, as an approach, and as a set of tools. And I'll give you an example or 2 of each one as I go through, and then we'll do our Q&A session. Donald Norman is a very well-known spokesperson and advocate and university professor and industry person in user experience design. He wrote a great book called The Design of Everyday Things, which is actually on the book list I'll share with you at the end of this presentation. But this is a great quote from Donald Norman, and it does really help kind of think about how to apply the philosophy of user experience design perhaps to your current job opportunities. You know, thinking about the set of experiences for your target audience, thinking about all the stages of a product or service, and making them all work seamlessly together. So again, there's so many great works that you could read about UX design from authors like Donald Norman, but just this philosophy of more human-centered design is a great thing to start applying to anything that you're doing today. In terms of approaches, what you see here is a very simple diagram representing what's called a user-centered design process. And with the user-centered design process, we put the needs of our audience in the focal point, in the center, and then we go through a series of iterative design steps to constantly, incrementally build out and flesh out and learn about our audience, their needs, their goals, creating perhaps some initial mock-ups and testing them with the audience to see how they work or don't work, and then quickly reiterating and continually improving our designs, involving our audience all along the way, not going into like a back room, doing a complete design and then presenting it, ta-da, there it is, right? So user-centered design, again, it's an awesome term to Google later on. This is a very simple diagram, but it does show the essence of that approach that you could take with whatever current STEM opportunities you're working with. This diagram is also another approach called scenario-based design. Now, scenario-based design is something that I've been using in industry for quite a long time. Scenario-based design is all about the ideas that you can actually research your audience, and working with your audience, write textual little stories about what your audience might be doing in the future with your product or service. Because writing little textual stories is a very quick activity to help envision a future. And you can even share that with your target audience. And you can have them contribute to those stories. And then you use these scenarios as a basis for creating mock-ups, designs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's called scenario-based design. And that's what this diagram is highlighting. Okay, our last thing that we're going to highlight about applying UX to STEM is tools. And I've got a couple of examples for you. So the idea with this is that these are all very specific tools that are in like the toolkit of UX design. There's many more. I'm only sharing with you a small sample, right? But for instance, reframing a problem, trying to see a problem from different perspectives can often be so insightful, a much better solution can be designed. And I'm going to share with you in just one moment a technique called the 5 whys to help you do that. Of course, goes without saying that researching the needs of your audience, of course, is a fundamental tool. Also, helping model your audience, in other words, to represent to all members of the team through user research who your audience is. I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. I mentioned scenarios used for design. That's stories of usage. In just a moment, I'm going to show you another tool called job stories, which is very helpful for that. And then, of course, sketching, prototyping, and testing designs with your audience. So in terms of the 5 whys, this is a technique actually created with Toyota, if I recall. And the idea is that by asking a series of whys, when you have a person describing what they're trying to do with a service or product, you help reveal the true goal or intention of that person. And the better you kind of, how can I say, the better that you can kind of dig into and identify the true goals, the true reasons why people want to do certain things, the more likely you can provide a more insightful and productive design for that audience. So that's called the 5 whys. Google that, you'll learn more about that technique. Here's an example user model called an empathy map. An empathy map is when, through user research and interviewing your audience and observing, you're learning about what kind of things your audience says and thinks and does and feels, and you get a more holistic view of their context and how they feel, how they think, and then you can better design for that audience. And empathy maps are often also used as a predecessor to personas, which is another very popular user model. I won't go into them right now, but I am a big fan of empathy maps because they're really, I find them very helpful to work with in terms of collaboration and really getting a better sense of how your audience is feeling about services or products. Last little tool for you, just again, quick little intro. It's called a job story. A job story is a 3-part kind of sentence that gets you to identify the situation that your audience finds themselves in, their motivation, and what they hope to achieve. And it looks deceptively simple, but it really does, how can I say, it really forces you to view their experience from their own perspective, and it will help reveal their goals. Again, very important when it comes to user experience design. And it will be, I find it very effective in terms of helping kind of collect and share out a user research analysis in this format of job stories. Okay, so almost ready for some questions. I'm hoping I've got a couple out there. I want to include a few things about next steps because, you know, this is a pretty quick overview. You probably have some things that maybe caught your attention. So I thought, well, what could I do to help you out there? So these are 3 just example resources that if you are interested in perhaps trying to become a UX designer in the future, these are 3 articles and 1 actually LinkedIn course, because many universities now have a free student account for LinkedIn. It's a really quite a good course LinkedIn has on planning a UX career. So I thought I'd include that. And the other 2 are just articles that you can view by anywhere. So those are 3 articles for you to review about becoming a UX designer. And again, I'll make sure these slides are shared out, including the video. And if something I've mentioned, seems of interest to you in terms of applying UX design to any kind of STEM work that you might be doing, either at university, co-op, or after graduation, these are some 3 example articles and another course actually on LinkedIn to kind of help introduce you to some introductory UX design techniques and approaches and tools that you might find helpful. Lastly, I thought it would be good to introduce to you a set of what I would call UX design fundamentals books. So these are all books I've personally read. I would say all of them, even just one of them, would serve as a really good introduction to UX design. And as you scan through that list, you'll see that some are more related to design, some are more related to user research, some are more related to actually UX design in like startups or companies. So I tried to kind of give you a range of kind of topics, but honestly, any one of these books, if it catches your attention and you can check it out in your library or online, might be something of interest to you to kind of learn more about the fundamentals of UX design. Wow. So that was hopefully a good overview for you of UX design. Again, really want to emphasize before we take some questions how I view UX design here. Of course, you can become a UX designer. It's a very wide and broad field. And so bringing your STEM knowledge and skills on top of some UX design stuff is really a great combination, I think, for many domains. But also, you can just start to apply UX design skill in many different ways, UX design techniques and approaches in many different ways to almost any problem STEM undertaking. And to be honest, I apply UX design to my teaching. I have found being able to apply UX design skills with my university teaching has really made my university course much more successful in the long run with my students. As I mentioned, I do have a UI design course I teach at SFU. I make all the courses open. I believe in open educational resources, so that URL is publicly accessible. Feel free to browse all the materials there. Hopefully something might be of interest to you. There's my contact information for you. You're more than welcome to reach out and ask me any questions after the session as well. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want, and I'm also on Twitter these days. And so, Ramit, I think that's about all I've got to share right now. Happy to take any questions that are out there. Thank you.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask Paul, you can just either throw them in the chat and one of us can read them out loud, or if you want, you can just turn on your mic and ask yourself. So from Mika, how did you go from economics to UX design?
So, even though I graduated with economics and computer science minor, I actually had an Apple Macintosh. And using the Apple Macintosh, I just saw such a great opportunity to create such a better user experience for people. Now, I wasn't using the phrase user experience at the time, but I was lucky because I had both my economics degree and computer science minor with a few extra courses thrown in there. I got a software job in Toronto doing Macintosh software in 1989, 90, so thoroughly dated. And I found that people started reacting positively to the way I was designing software, even though it was a whole new field to me. And that really paved the way for 30 years of lifelong learning, because really everything that I do professionally now, I learned after university. But the computing science courses I had as an undergrad were essential for that move sideways. So in other words, for me, if I didn't have those computer science courses, I would not have been able to move sideways into the field of user interface design. So that's why that approach is, to me, is very important. So that's how I got into it, was through the Apple Macintosh. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, and then from Peter, can you talk a little bit about the course you teach at SFU?
Oh, sure thing. So the course I teach is 363. It's an introductory user interface design course for computer science majors mostly. And so it's like, wow, this one course is for most comp sci majors at SFU, the only time they're going to get to experience user interface design. So I designed the course to be quite an overview course where you kind of touch upon almost everything about user experience design. For instance, we talk about what user experience design is, we talk about user research, the students participate in some user research, the students then kind of create some designs using industry standard tools like Adobe XD or Figma, and then they either analyze those designs with a usability technique like heuristic valuations, or they do usability testing. So it tries to cover the entire, if you will, user-centered design lifecycle as much as possible that you can do in 13 weeks. And hopefully, you know, my goal with the course is to really change students' perspectives on what user experience design is, how it might be applied to their professional work and even their university work, etc. And it's a very project-oriented course. There's a group project that involves user research and design and usability testing. And so that's a little brief overview of the course. And again, all the materials are available on that website, including an extensive what I call a UX techniques guide, which kind of highlights the main topics we explore in the course. And then for each topic, there's a number of web articles to kind of explore that topic. So it's a real kind of self-learning kind of opportunity there if you want to check that out too. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah. And then from Somalia, do you have any more tips about how to build a strong UX portfolio?
So I guess the trick is look for opportunities to do such. So like I say, it's either your own side projects, or it's either your own website, or maybe it's community projects. But you know, it's the benefit is twofold. You learn design by designing, or I should say you learn to be a better designer by designing. And so anytime that you're actually designing, regardless of what it is, it's an opportunity to build skills. So that's going to benefit you. And then of course, anything that you can show at the end and the process. That's an important point I want to highlight. Portfolio is not just the end result, but of course the process along the way. And that's one of the advantages of when you do these, either your own website, or if it's a passion project, or if it's for a community group, you can document and share then the process that you went through along the way. And that's something that's really valuable for employers to see, because then they start to see how you actually work and how you actually design. So I hope that answer helped a little bit in terms of portfolio building. Thank you.
Okay,
Uh,
so, oh,
uh,
go ahead.
oh, hi. Can I like use the mic and speak?
Mhm.
Because,
Sure.
yeah. Hi there. So, first of all, I would really want to like thank you for that amazing presentation, because it was a lot of information and like a lot of saturated informations, and it's definitely gonna help me a lot.
Great.
So, yeah. And like firstly, like, can we get the PowerPoint presentation that you used? Because there are like some of the rules, like the 5 whys and some of the other ones that I kind of missed out on. I mean, so I was just thinking like if we could get the PowerPoint file or something.
For sure.
Yeah,
I can share that with Remy. No problem at all.
yeah.
Oh,
So we'll post the recording of this talk on our social media pages, and we'll also make the slides available. We'll figure out how, either through a website or by emailing people that would like to see them. But yeah.
okay, that's great. So my question was that for like I've been doing UI and UX designing for quite a while now, and it was just this year that I kind of figured out that it's something that I'm really liking it, and maybe I don't know, like I'm really passionate about it because looking back when I was a kid, I used to be like more of a creative and artistic person. And maybe like after reflecting on it, and I just really find it pretty like it doesn't bore me as much as any other activities would. So I was just thinking that I mean I do UI and UI designing. Like I make apps, like not I don't make apps, like I designed the UI for the apps, and like me and my friends, we are trying to build an app, and like I'm helping with the design and everything. But um, like I've learned prototyping and all that, but there's just something I wanted to know. Like if I look forward to apply for a job for like a UI or UX designer, do I have to like learn the front end part of coding, or like do I also have to learn like overall the hard parts, such as like whatever happens in the the back end and all that? Because I was looking forward to applying for like a field, something as similar to as a front end web developer or a UI UX designer. So I was just wondering what kind of programming languages should I focus on, like could go like it can like go hand in hand with UI and UX, like designing and all that.
Okay, great. Thank you for your question. So a couple of comments. One is, of course, it would depend on what the company is looking for, because, of course, different companies will ask for different things. So that's one thing. Another thing to think about is, this is a topic of discussion in the UI UX field in general, right? Now, how much coding knowledge should designers have? And there's a variety of opinions. Now, personally, my opinion is you don't necessarily need to be able to write a front end, but you need to understand the basics of what's involved. By doing that, you're able to then have discussions and collaboration with the development team members. So that's where I see it, is that it doesn't mean that you have to know enough about a particular even language per se, but you need to know about the technical aspects. So, just for instance, CSS or whatever kind of aspect there would be. So you have a better means of communication with your development team members. Now, so that in general, that's my approach, is that, again, you need that fundamental knowledge, or at least that's going to help you be more competitive. There are situations where companies are looking for, UX developer, that's the kind of terminology. That's a different matter. And then you obviously do need to know a specific language, a different framework, whatever the case would be. But for myself, this is the way I see it. It's knowing at least the fundamentals to have that communication with development, that collaboration with development. That is the way that I look at it. So I hope that answers, or partly answers, your question.
Okay. Yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense now, because while I was working with CSS, I mean, you touched upon it, so it did. And like while you were talking about CSS, whenever I was writing code for CSS, like on Figma, there's a feature like where you can export the source code for your design, like the coordinates, and like when you design a button, like when I'm designing a button or anything on Figma, like I can export the code. And I've learned the front end part of the web development, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and all that. I can like relate when I'm like trying to export code out of my design, and like I know like this design has these CSS properties and these coordinates, and these are the pixel size and all that. And maybe when I try to fit it in my CSS, I can just like I know like how or where it should go, so that it's just the way I want it. Like if I want to set a button on the website, I know that this is how I can do it. So is that like enough to apply for a UX or UI designing job?
I think you're going in a great direction. Again, it will always depend on the specifics of what the company is looking for, but it sounds like you're going in a great direction to me.
Okay. Thank you so much. It really means a lot. Thanks a lot.
Great. You're welcome. Thank you.
And so we do have a question from Nika as well. Do a lot of employers expect you to have a website as your portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, that's, very often, especially if you're applying online, they're going to want you to send your portfolio some way, right? And so, if you've got that as a website and it's a simple URL, I mean, obviously that's going to make it pretty easy. And sometimes employers might ask for more specific formats. I can't speak to that. But having your portfolio online, I think, is a great asset. And then, like I say, though, be ready to also maybe have the portfolio in perhaps another presentation mode, or perhaps how you want to kind of tell more detailed stories, right, about it. But there's lots of different opinions and ways that you can look at portfolios. I'm sure you could probably Google and see lots of different examples. But I think in general, yep, having a website portfolio is definitely in the right direction, easily shareable. And also, again, like I mentioned, also be ready to tell more detailed, in-depth stories about your development process, your design challenges, and things like that. Thank you for the question.
And then from Smalia, how did you make your connections to have these coffee interviews? And then just going off of that, a question that I have as well is, what's like a good way to reach out to people that you connect with, like for example, on LinkedIn for coffee interviews or coffee chats?
Sure. When I was doing it more on the other side of the table, in other words, when I was actually just getting into UX design, LinkedIn and stuff like that wasn't around, so it was more of a manual process. However, I think in my experience, and now that I'm being approached by people, you just want to be honest about why you're reaching out. And of course, you're going to have to identify people that you think you would be able to have a useful conversation or connection with. about things. Like, so instance, I've gotten informational interview requests from a variety of people. Very often there are people who have seen me on LinkedIn and have a career and they're interested in maybe applying some UX design stuff, and they want to learn more about the field in general, or they want to learn more about the kinds of clients I've consulted with, or they want to learn more about, a particular aspect of my business or what I've done. So again, not looking for a job with me, but they want to hear about my experiences, and hopefully those experiences can help them. So I don't really have like a magical way to do that per se, except just to be honest, and just be open about hopefully being able to connect with someone to learn about their field of expertise, and making it as convenient as possible to do that. And very often people are very friendly and happy to share their own experiences to help others. And so again, this is something that I try to do. By the way, another approach that I've also used in the past is particularly when I was kind of doing a pivot around 2011 or so into the more mobile design space. I started with connecting with some industry people myself, in terms of some materials that I was working on to help others better understand the mobile design space. So I actually would share out these materials to these people I was trying to connect with to get their feedback. And that was a very effective way I found as well, to try to generate that connection. Sometimes it was just through email, but more often it was like a coffee chat or even an informal meeting, right, on that. Another thing is the phrase informational meeting. I did pick that again on purpose. You can actually Google that term. And that is, it seems to be right now, these days, I didn't know the term earlier on, but these days it does seem to be the standard way for what I'm describing. So I bet you could probably get some additional tips that way. So I hope I answered both of your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then from Peter, for program UI design, what language would be the best for beginners? And also any reason behind the language choice behind 363.
Okay, so actually I can't say I have a programming language recommendation on that, because that's not actually a space that I work in myself. I actually use a variety of prototyping tools or content management systems as a way to interactively create or mock up my designs. In terms of maybe a possible option for your question, it would be prototyping tools, because prototyping tools are now something that there's a huge number of prototyping tools in the industry. But if there was one prototyping tool I would suggest to you, it would be Figma. It's very popular in the industry right now. There's actually the ability for students to email if you do a Google for Figma, you'll find the Figma website. You can apply for a free student account. It has fantastic collaboration means, and you can get pretty complex interactive prototypes out of the tool without needing to do actually much coding. So that would be kind of some feedback for you, but I can't say per se a programming language because that's not my space. Hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And so I think that's all the questions that were in the chat
Actually, I have
already.
a couple of questions.
Mhm.
First of all, I understand that the user interface design is a broad field, and it constitutes everything, a lot of areas. My questions are, how do we, where do you see is that, where is the market that would require the most user interface? Like, which field is growing more?
So I would say that honestly, as a field, the demand for user experience design shows no signs of stopping. I mean, it now is not just software, but for instance, and by the way, this is a great case study for you to look at. The UK government, starting a couple of years ago, went on a huge mission to make its government services more accessible and a better experience for its citizens. I mean, it's textbook user experience design at large. And the UK government web team, and I forget their name, they actually make a lot of these materials available online. So if you start to Google UK government user experience, something like that, I'm sure you probably run across it. So this is government, right? So you can see even now government is thinking about the services applied for their citizens. How can we improve their user experience? So, you know, it used to be user experience design was just about software. And then user experience design got more about the real world. And now we even have governments involved in trying to improve the user experience of their services. So I can't say per se that there's a particular field that I think that there's going to be more pickup in user experience design. It's more like almost every field is now seeing a pickup in terms of being able to apply human-centered design, user experience design, techniques, approaches, philosophies, tools to make it better. So I think there's a wide variety of opportunities in general. And the field, like I say, if you just go to like one of the local job sites or, you know, indeed.ca or whatever it be, just do a Google for user experience design or search in a job site, you'll see the number of jobs out there. It's quite amazing how much the field has grown. So I hope that kind of answers your question anyway.
I have a second question as well. Is there a way to speed up the development process, like in terms of maybe coding or in terms of how do we organize stuff, I guess?
So, wow, that's a big question, and that's like the holy grail, right, of software development.
Right.
So a couple of comments anyway. One is that, you know, one of the ideas of agile versus waterfall development, agile is more of a incremental development process, was to help not speed up, but by making less mistakes. In other words, by making less software that's not a good fit, and then having to redo that software. And so, you know, so I want to be careful about how I phrase things. So it's not so much speeding up really, it's more that traditionally a lot of software has failed because it really didn't address the needs of the audience. It really didn't actually help them in reaching their goals. And so by speed up, I look at it as if you have a more accurate and incremental and iterative development process involving your audience and making sure their needs and goals are center point, creating incremental builds that are smaller to release and easier to test out and et cetera and validate, then you reduce the chances that you're going to come out with something that's not a good fit at the end and you've gone through all your budget and then it's too late. Does that kind of help?
Yes, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome. Great question, by the way.
We do have 2 more questions in the chat. So would a comp sci minor be useful at all in UX?
For sure. You know, a comp sci minor, I think, is an awesome thing in terms of UX field because this way you will be able to have a much better dialogue with your development oriented teammates. And that's important. I mean, that's something that companies are looking for in terms of not only having UX design skills, but it's not like a silo anymore. UX is now more distributed amongst various aspects of a company. So being able to speak the language, if you will, I don't mean programming language per se, but just in general technical language, very valuable. And for my own experience, it was fundamental in terms of my entry in the field. And even though this is a different time, it's still critical and valuable to have that technical knowledge to go along with UX design skills. So I think that's a phenomenal minor to have. Great question. I hope I answered that.
And from Callie, what would you say is the best starting point for integrating UX design to other fields in STEM, like biotechnology, for example?
I don't know if I could really be too specific because my knowledge of that domain is not there, but in general, you would want to look for opportunities where you think a better experience of something would be productive for your audience, or perhaps opportunities where you feel that the real needs of an audience is not being met currently, and there's opportunities to improve that. Or if you also see an opportunity where, you know what, we don't know if, you know, the user needs are being really met well, maybe we can do some analysis on that and research to see how we might be able to improve it, because every user experience can be improved. I've never created a single design obviously that could not have been improved more. So there's always opportunities for that. So I hope that gives you a couple of different ways to look at it. By the way, if you start Googling, again, I'm always talking about Google, STEM and user experience design, I bet you'll also find some example case studies out there, just in general anyway, that might interest you. Hope I answered your question. Thanks.
And then from Smila, can you explain a bit more on how to produce a persona profile using an empathy map?
So that's a fantastic question. I think it's beyond the scope of this session. However, what I would say is that empathy maps that focus on how your audience is thinking and what they're saying and feeling and what their goals are, in my experience, if you want to produce a persona, and a persona is kind of like a sketch of a particular type of user, focusing more on behaviors than demographics, by the way. Empathy maps are a great empathy maps are a great first step to create a better persona. So that's the way that I look at empathy maps. Empathy maps can often be drafted upon with just some internal stakeholders and some initial user research. And then you can go out and do more extensive user research for creation of your personas. And again, lots of different ways to do this. But I do find that empathy maps are a great precursor to personas, and so many great articles and even books out there about the creation of personas. Personas are more documented than empathy maps. Empathy maps is a newer approach. Still a lot of articles out there to learn from, but definitely personas have been around longer. And so you probably find some additional information. So I hope at least that helps in terms of a first or second step for you. Thank you for the question.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I think we can end this session. Thank you so much, Paul, for coming out and doing this session for us. I think it was really helpful.
You're most welcome.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah, and for everyone that's here, if you're interested in seeing the video, you can check out our Instagram at STEM Fellowship SFU, and we'll post the recording for this session as well as the one that's coming up later on at 2 with a mechanical engineer sometime over the next week. And we'll also post the slides somewhere.
Great. Well, thank you again. It was a pleasure joining you today.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.